it's a short-term detriment. And so let's just say it's costing, each one of their employees are still having to pay and benefits and things like that. But at the end of the day, what they're going to receive is now these first responders are now going to have a commitment.
Welcome to the Howie and Beastmode podcast, where we discuss all things business, including growth, strategy, and execution, as well as personal and professional development.
So Dennis,
let's join Howie and Beastmode in conversation.
That you're working for, but what kind of company are you working for right now?
So I'm working for software holding companies. So what we do is we buy small software and SaaS, software as a service companies in kind of multiple industries, multiple places, multiple countries. And then we just manage them as one group. So we currently have over 100 various companies and various pieces and in various places in the world under our management. And we just make sure that the companies cross-pollinate, that some great ideas that happen in one company move to the other company. We provide them obviously efficiencies on scale. So every single company doesn't have to have its own accounting function. We provide all that. We provide centralized customer service, centralized engineering strategy, and just help the entire company move in the desired direction.
That's a smart idea. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Fascinating. So a software holding company and mostly SaaS companies, right?
Yeah, we mostly have SaaS companies, but we have small pieces of perpetual licenses.
Yeah.
When customers basically buy the license into eternity, and we have an even smaller piece of hardware. So sometimes we ship physical stuff on which software runs, but the kind of the core of the business is SaaS.
Got it. So the holding company basically provides things like HR, like some general services as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's what was typically called the shared services.
Shared services. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah, making sure that there's cross-pollination. There's a variety of ways that could be leveraged. That's interesting though. It's been it's more of a fantasy right now for me than it is really a dream or a goal. But I thought it'd be great to buy a software company and like a little micro software company and try to do something with it in the future. And so it's fun that you're getting to actually be, involved in buying small software companies and helping them to improve and scale and also work together. That's a great idea.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. So what's your particular, role? What are some of the things that you do there?
So I help finance function. So I'm more or less in charge of everything that's related to treasury, accounting, collections, invoicing, bills. I mean, everything that has a dollar sign next to it, there is a good chance I have some sort of involvement into the process.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So maybe give us a little bit of a history or a little bit of a background on you as well, kind of rewinding time a little bit on how you came up in business. At any point, if you want to go back to school, you can, or post school, doesn't matter. But yeah, I think it'd be great to hear a little bit of how you started and some of the journeys along the way.
So I think the easiest way to kind of describe my career journey without going too deep is I love to actually improve the processes. And by saying improve the processes, do it in such a way that we start with not making money or not making a lot of money, and we end with making money or making lots of money. So as opposed to kind of environments. I know some people like this environments where you just all about presentations and all about optics. My kind of passion is how to come to the company that struggle in a certain extent. Most likely it's going to be bleeding cash or not earning enough cash. Find out what doesn't work right, what's the root cause of the problem, and then work with the leadership team and with obviously with the company's employees to improve things and get it to the next level. And over my career, I've been blessed to be part of kind of various industries. So I started doing that for specialty chemicals, and then I moved to plastic bags. And then I moved on to blockchain, to kind of Bitcoins and all this other hot stuff that you can read in newspapers. Then moved on to organic milk. So my office was literally located like in the middle of the farm. And I spent quite a bit of time just walking around the milking parlor and observing how cows move and how we can improve kind of cows move and everything that's related to cows. So spend quite a bit of time with farmers, and finally, so now I'm dealing with software as a service. So have been doing that in kind of many places. I guess my dream job is a place where you can come and you just walk around the plant and then you see something that can be improved, and you just go to your boss and you say, well, I have this great idea, and you're being asked a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. The first question is how much resources you need, and second is how much time you need. And if the answer is like, I don't need much resources and I can get it done in 3 months or so, and you're just being named champion on the spot, and you start doing that. Not a huge fan of companies where you walk around the plant and you find some great improvements, some kind of great ideas, and then you come back and you're told to do a PowerPoint presentation. So you spend or waste, depending on your perspective, the whole day doing the PowerPoint presentation. You send it to some skyscrapers hundreds of miles away. And then 3 weeks later, once you try to figure out what happens with your kind of improvement proposal, you figure out that 3 out of those 5 didn't even open your presentation. Mm-hmm. So I worked in both environments, and I'm a huge fan of just let's go and get things done. Let's go. Let's identify what doesn't work. Let's talk to people. Let's observe with our own eyes, and then come up with a plan and execute it.
Love that.
I got to tell you, Dennis, the dairy farm stories are some of my favorite. Just so you know.
Yeah,
whenever you would share those.
Yeah. So I hope farmers don't listen to this podcast, but if they do, like, no offense, but I look at the dairy farm as basically a manufacturing plant, right? So you have, in my particular case, 6,000 machines. So you have some inputs, which is feed that goes on the front end of the cow, and then you have some finished goods on the back end of the cow, and your job is basically to figure out how to make it run in the most efficient way. So that's when people say, like, oh, well, okay, you have experience in agriculture. I say, no, like, all my experience is manufacturing. It's just sometimes manufacturing is done by steel machines, and sometimes manufacturing is done by animals. But it's the same kind of problems, the same kind of solutions.
Have you,
if you look at it as a...
Have you had a chance to read Ray Dalio's book called Principles?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's good. He talks like you. You kind of almost got in a sidecar with him a minute ago when you said that, because he talks about everything is, or many things at least, are really machines and can be improved. Even human relationships and other things can be kind of boiled down to things that are somewhat repetitive. You said that nature and many things, and even people, tend to have things that are repetitive that happened. And so if they're repetitive, they can be predicted. And if they're repetitive, they can be improved. And I'm not doing a great job. I'm just listening to the audiobook right now. So I have a bunch of outdoor work right now. So I've got this 14-hour book to listen to. But I think I'm in chapter 2 or 3, and it's really good. It starts off with his history, but it's Ray Dalio, and the book is, I think it's just called Principles. But he runs, I think, maybe the most successful hedge fund in the world. And so anyway, but he talks a lot about improving things like you're talking about, and turning things into repetitive processes and things of that nature. So that's really cool. That's cool to hear somebody who's really doing that in such a variety of places. And it kind of speaks to, when we talk about, specialty chemicals, plastic bags, blockchain, organic milk, and SaaS software, obviously completely different areas. And yet you've been able to come in and make a difference across those different areas. So that's great.
Yeah, well, speaking of the books, for people who are not in entirely service-based industry, like service-based industry, they kind of like separate. But for any industry that has anything to do with any physical object, whether it's be chemicals or oil and gas or manufacturing or agriculture or anything, I think one of the best books is The Goal. I forgot who the author was, but it was kind of a story about a plant, and then kind of some events happen on this plant. But the outcome of the book is that a lot of people think about the plant as kind of like different departments doing different things, but that's not kind of a good way to look about it. Is that almost every plant and almost every organization is just like a very long chain of processes. And this chain of processes, regardless of how efficient the organization is, whether it's a small farm or it's a SpaceX, it always bottlenecks somewhere. And efficient management is just to find where it bottlenecks, how it bottlenecks, debottleneck it, and then kind of observe it again, because once you remove one bottleneck, it necessarily bottlenecks somewhere else, right? So if you solve the bottlenecks in the production, then it will probably bottleneck on sales or on capital, or something like that. And just looking at the organization as this kind of complex chain and trying to find where it bottlenecks and debottleneck it it's an amazing story. So I definitely would recommend to read for, again, anybody who is outside of services industry.
What's it called again?
It's called The Goal.
Okay.
I don't remember who the author is, unfortunately. But.
Okay.
Dennis, I got 3 questions for you, and they kind of, I think, feed off each other. And I'm just going to kind of let you roll with it as you see fit. But kind of my first thing that just really piques my interest is, number one, how do you find root cause issues? What are you looking for? Number 2, once you find it, what's the first thing that generally, because again, if you're saying that this same process can go from cow milking to bag making to SAS or sales as a service, what is the first thing that we're addressing? And then again, from there, you just kind of mentioned it. How do I make sure that the improvement I'm making is not causing a bigger problem down the line?
Well, I will start with the last question. I didn't say that the improvement you are making is causing any problems down the line. What I'm trying to say is that you have a natural system, kind of every organization is a natural system, and every component, kind of every chain in this natural system, it has its own throughput, or like capacity or bandwidth, whatever you call it. And let's say for the sake of example, we have an organization that will have 5 departments. And for the sake of kind of simplicity, we're just gonna assign the bandwidth with the numbers. Like in a natural world, you typically don't deal with 5 departments, and you have to look at the bandwidth like more qualitatively. than just a number, but just for example, we're going to assign the number. So we have 5 departments, and kind of the organization flows through the 5 departments from the first one to the 5th one. And let's say the first department will have a bandwidth of 200, the second one will have a bandwidth of 100, the third one will have a bandwidth of 500, and then 600 and 700. So if you look at this chain, right, so obviously the second department, which has a bandwidth of 100, is the bottleneck. So it doesn't matter how much you can push through the first department, it's going to get stuck in the second department because it can only do that much. And all this great capacity at your tail end that you have, like 600, 700, 800, it just doesn't matter. So everything gets stuck at this department with 100 capacity. So you go ahead and you say, well, okay, great. So now I have identified it. I find the solution. I solved it. So now let's say we have a perfect world and department number 2 now has a capacity of 1,000. Great, right? So in and by itself, it didn't cause any issues elsewhere. So your department number 1 still has capacity of 200, and your department number 3 still has capacity of 600 and 700 and 800. But now, once you look at your system, your department 2 is now no longer a problem at all. Now department number 1 becomes a problem. Because now if you try to push more stuff through the system, department 1 is where things get stuck, where you only have 200. And so now your focus switches to department number 1, not because what you did in department number 2 caused some problems, but because once kind of you basically list them as priority. And once you resolve priority number 1, something immediately becomes priority number 2. As priority number 1 is no longer in there, priority number 2 becomes priority number 1.
Do you normally see that?
The cycle.
Do you normally see that before you get started?
Well, yes, yeah, of course.
So before you would start the improvement on step 2, you would already know this is going to cause the issue in 1, and so it's all part of the plan.
No, it's not part of the plan. So the way it works is basically you say, okay, so speaking about improvements, you have to take, I think, then a couple of steps back. In order to solve the problem, typically, like most important thing that people don't do, in my kind of experience, is that they don't answer the most fundamental question: is what problem are we trying to solve, right? So if you're just trying to generically solve a problem, like let's make a better organization, you will probably get nowhere, because you will constantly have some different ideas, and kind of the problem is with having lots of ideas is that, like, you have executed the idea and you don't really know where your organization is better as a result of making this idea. So first you have to come up with typically a very measurable thing that you want to improve. So for most organizations, for most kind of for-profit organizations that I have been part of, like, this is some sort of profitability, right? It may be the diet, maybe net income, maybe sales, like something like that. So the first thing is we say, okay, we have the current state. So let's say our EBITDA is now 5% of sales, and we want to get to 15%. This is our goal. So now we have clearly defined the problem. The problem is insufficient EBITDA. We know how we're going to measure it, and we have some sort of target, right? And it's not necessarily to set a kind of hard and stone target, but having some idea toward where you're going and how far along you are definitely helps. And then you say, look, we have our current situation, we have our target. What are the biggest drivers that kind of prevent us from getting to the desired situation? And at this point of time, you typically come to the conclusion is that, okay, I want to go from 5% EBITDA to 15% EBITDA. So I have a 10% gap. Out of this 10% gap, just, and I'm going to get back to this question in a couple of minutes, but let's say out of this 10%, 4% seems to be production waste. And then another 2% seems to be clients on which we are losing money. And then another 2% will be like inefficient purchasing. And that's going to be what, 8%. And then like 1 more percent will be property taxes, and another 1% will be kind of excessive headcount, right? So once you get this sort of idea, you obviously want to attack your 4% problem first, right? You don't want to go with over like 1% problem. But once you have successfully tackled your 4% problem, it doesn't mean that you're there yet. The next one will be 2%, and then another 2%, and 1%, and 1%. In terms of how you find ways to improve, it seems like unusual advice, but I can vouch with my own experience and with experience of kind of hundreds of my classmates that it works. And the method is called go, see, and assess, right? And what it means is, well, again, it kind of works perfectly in the manufacturing environment, maybe not so much in the services environment, is you literally go to the production floor and you aim to spend there the whole day. You aim to spend the entire 8 hours. Just walking around, just talking to people, just making observations, and just asking a lot of why questions. And the professor who actually taught me this particular technique told me the following, is that, Dennis, if you go to the production floor and you spend there 8 hours, and in 8 hours you do not come back to your office absolutely embarrassed. And by saying embarrassed, I mean embarrassed. It's not like shocked, it's not surprised. It's like absolutely embarrassed of what you have observed there. You have not been looking hard enough. And again, I can vouch for myself, and I can vouch for other people that this is true. If you go there with the mindset that I want to kind of deeply see the problems, I want to deeply ask kind of why questions, maybe try to operate machine by yourself. So I try to operate machine for maybe like an hour, a couple of hours, and see what it looks like, and how operating the machine by myself compares to how I see other people operating machines. And yeah, and I came like with absolutely embarrassing results. So in this particular case, the company had Chick-fil-A as their key client, and that was 2014. And I went to the warehouse, and I found there a pallet of production which was marked Chick-fil-A Bowl 2014. Excuse me, Chick-fil-A Bowl 2012. So that's 2014. This is kind of a very specific event, right? So, I mean, by 2014, that's undoubtedly just a piece of junk. It has no meaningful kind of purpose in life. This particular like merchandise has to be trashed. But still, it's sitting on the warehouse for 2 years. And so I basically just start talking to people, what exactly happened and what kind of the background story is. And turned to find out that the company has 3 departments, right? So let's call them like department number 1, department number 2, and department number 3. And well, for the sake of kind of adding a little bit color, the first department extrudes, the second one prints, and the third one cuts, right? So we have extruding department, we have printing department, we have cutting department. And so there is a particular system that forms production orders. And let's say Chick-fil-A wanted like 100 pieces of this particular merchandise. And so the production order system says that in order to produce 100 pieces of this particular merchandise, you have to produce 10,000 feet of the first order work in progress material. And so the order for 10,000 feet comes to the first department, to the extrusion department. And the extrusion department starts working on that, and that's where people meet the machines. So it produces 10,000 feet exactly as desired, and time is 5:30. So the guy who runs the machine looks at his watch and like, my shift ends at 6. And I really don't feel like changing over this machine. So let me just let it overrun. So he lets it overrun the machine. So the machine, instead of producing 10,000 feet, it produces 15,000 feet. This 15,000 feet goes on to the next department. And so the guy in the next department, he looks at the paperwork, and the paperwork says, I should have gotten like 10,000 feet, and I've got 15,000 feet. So something seems to be wrong there. And that's where human psychology kicks in. So again, the guy has all the paperwork, his eyes are open, his eyes are open. He exactly knows that something is wrong. So this is kind of a prime time to raise the hand and say, guys, let's figure out. Instead, he makes the conclusion that the guy in the first department definitely not dumb. He definitely knew what he was doing. And since he produced 13,000 feet, there should have been like a valid reason. So he takes this 13,000 feet of film and he lowers it into the machine. So runs it through the machine. Now come to the third department. The third department looks and like, well, we should have gotten 10,000 feet of raw material. Instead, we are looking at 13,000 feet. And now the third department has like, well, the first two departments definitely knew what they were doing. Like there should definitely be like a very, very, very good and strong business reason. Probably somebody told them something. And so they just take this film and convert into 130 items of merchandise. Then the warehouse comes and says, well, here's my order from Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A wants 100 pieces of merchandise. I have 130. What do I do? I probably just ship 100 to Chick-fil-A and put 30 on the shelf to collect dust. And that's exactly where we found those 30 pieces collecting dust 2 years later, right? So in this particular case, we had 3 people who clearly knew that something was wrong. They had very explicit evidence. They had all the authority. They were not under kind of any kind of time pressure. They should just raise their hand and say, look, guys, something's wrong here. Let's backtrack. Let's fix it. Let's kind of not do strange things. But instead, we have stuff collecting dust on the shelf. So this is kind of a poster child of embarrassing stories, but basically everywhere I went, you always found something that you were like absolutely embarrassed. We just
I think
on the
maybe people who are in the job sometimes are really close to it and they're used to it, and so it's almost like the frog in the kettle, where they got used to the water warming up and they didn't jump out. So they kind of let something happen chronically that was bad because they were used to
it. That's first, and second, you have to understand that in most organizations, people are siloed, right? So the person thinks, what's in there for me? So let's say the guy in the second department, if he was the shareholder, right? If that was his own money being wasted there and then, I'm sure he would have raised the hand. But for him, he just chose the path of least resistance, right? So that's not his fault. Something came from the left door. Other than to go an extra mile and try to figure out why it doesn't meet his expectations, he just put it on the machine and pushed it to the next door. So he formally did his job. But the organization in total suffered to a certain degree. So I think this is very important for their for kind of for the leadership team to understand that people will look at their particular area of responsibility, and in most cases, with their best intentions, they just don't see the big picture. Then they have limited incentives to go ahead, and that's again the management's responsibility to do it. But my point is that typically it's not difficult, right? So kind of I think a lot of people have a misconception that, oh well, okay, I have to bring kind of a consulting firm and spend $10,000 in 2 weeks to find some sort of improvements. Like, well, typically no. Just spend 8 hours of your time, go on the production floor, and in 8 hours you will have a very clear idea of what to do. I almost promise. I can't speak for any organization. And
what type of questions are you asking, Dennis? You said why questions. Do you have like a top 5 why questions that you seem to ask a lot?
Why things happen the way they happen. So you start by just walking around and you just start by walking around and looking at something that looks unusual, and then you just start asking why. So in this particular case, I walked around, and there were kind of 2 observations. So the first one is were those bags, and the second one is that on a particular machine, kind of stuff was just absolutely flying around, right? So why is stuff flying around? It's supposed to be like nicely packed into the boxes, not flying around. And then people typically tell you, oh, it's because of this and that, and then this and that kind of gets to the second level of discussion, and yet another level of discussion, yet another level of discussion. In my experience, people are very open to kind of tell what exactly goes wrong, right? And it's not that people will try to hide all the defects and flaws. If you really come there and you come with a mindset, I came to learn, I didn't came to punish you. Again, I haven't been part of the organization where people wouldn't kind of tell you the truth, and that comes down that finding improvements is as easy as getting out and keeping your eyes open. And
it is interesting because there's a show that I don't know if it's still on anymore, but Undercover Boss was basically what you're saying, except for they happen to be undercover. But you're just saying that kind of thing, that sort of inspection and kind of, being on the floor or being in the business basically for observation purposes, can be done by any manager. It doesn't have to be like the CEO who's going undercover with a costume. It could really be anybody. And then, in a number of hours, you're probably going to find improvements.
Right, but I think for CF4, this is the most impactful, if you will, because once the CEO goes in there, the CEO typically has a really good idea of the entire organization, right? So he or she would be able to see kind of both the supply chain issues and kind of the customer service issues and production issues and whatever issues may be out there. And another great question to ask is like, what was your biggest problem? Asking the floor level employees, what was your biggest problem over the last 24 hours? it's typically very telling. So they're going to tell you something that kind of just opens the discussion. So what exactly happens and why happens? And another advice is you have to understand that those people on the production floor, they have a lot of biases, and if you are like really friendly with them, it makes a lot of sense to try to challenge those biases by just friendly saying like, can we go and check? Yeah, I see that you say that this is the case. This is what happened on the specialty chemicals plant. So in specialty chemicals plant, we lost. I mean, not in a physical sense lost, but there were some strange things going on in accounting that 800 pounds of material, of a work in progress material, just disappeared, right? So they just came in but didn't come out for some reason. It was either lost or it appeared from nowhere. But there was like a huge discrepancy. And so I went out to the field. It was not even the production floor; it was in open air. And we started looking how the material kind of moves around. And in this particular case, it's been like blown in the tubes. It was kind of powdery material. So it was being blown by the tubes, and we just discussed like where it goes, and like it goes from this silo to this silo. And I say like, what happens in this particular silo? Or they say, well, it's full, like you cannot blow anything in there. I say, can we climb the silo and kind of just open the lid and see that it's actually full? So we climb the silo, open the lid, and it's empty. It's like it's completely empty. There is no material in there. And so I say, well, how do you know that? How comes that you are the production guy and you think it's full and it's not? And figured out that it was like a hearsay. So somebody on the other shift left some sort of notes in some sort of spreadsheet, and then those notes were misread by someone. And so at the end of the day, the whole shift was under a strong impression that the silo was full and you cannot blow any single material in it. And nobody spent like any single minute to see whether it was the case or not. And we figured out that this is where the material was disappearing. Like people didn't really have an idea where material was and where it was not. And it was just a matter of start regularly measuring. So don't trust your judgment. Don't trust this guy from the other shift. Don't trust the notes on the whiteboard. just go there and measure it. But
do you believe
that goes back to just keep your eyes open and kind of have a healthy share of skepticism.
Do you believe that it is possible to continuously improve real time, or do you have to wait for things to go bad to then go find improvements?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You absolutely have to improve in real time, but in terms of improvement, I absolutely loved the idea that I've heard one day in MIT, and this idea sounds kind of unusual when you hear it first, but then once you start thinking what this idea really means, it makes the whole lot of sense. So the idea is called fail fast, and it obviously contains of two parts. The first one is fail, second one is fast. So fail. So fail basically implies that if you never experiment, you never improve. So you always have to stretch the envelope. You always have to come up with some kind of new ideas. And the fail part comes here, that if you always experiment but you never fail, is that you're not experimenting radically enough, right? So you're not kind of pushing the envelope to the degree where you challenge the fundamentals. So if you really want to improve some sort of system, you have to push the envelope and fail, right? And that's where the fast portion comes into play, because you really don't want to run kind of a plant-wide improvement experiment when you will only know whether something worked or whether it failed for the next 2 years, right? Because coming, if you come to the end of the line and figure out that it didn't work, this would be very sad. So what you do want to do is you want to break down your experiment in the smallest in the smallest parts possible, such that trying to on every single part. Do you still hear me?
Getting some frozen, a little bit of frozen video.
Brian?
Not really.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're lagging a little bit.
So if you don't want to wait 2 years, if you let something go for 2 years, then that's not exactly fast.
Yeah. So you want to break down your experiment in as smallest pieces as possible, so that at the end of every piece you get a feedback whether it worked and whether it didn't. And obviously, if it didn't work, then this is an opportunity to learn and conduct the second piece of the experiment differently. And if it fails again, then you learn again and you kind of conduct it differently. So the consistent improvement, yes, absolutely. I'm the biggest proponent. It's just a matter of conducting it in small steps and constantly taking and incorporating feedback from kind of this small step improvements.
It's good. A lot of what you talked about is management inspection. Have you seen implemented in management inspection? You're blending a lot of wisdom into an approach here, which is great. But management inspection is one side. Is there a place, or have you ever seen it implemented where people are using feedback as part of the radar, like not just like walking the floor, but also putting processes in place for people to report and share ideas for improvements?
Well, maybe I don't fully understand your question, but obviously, all the improvements, they have to be executed by people. And kind of thinking that I just came with a great idea, and now this great idea will bring great results. That's not how it works. So to give you an example, on the dairy farm, when I joined and when we did some preliminary analysis, in that particular case, it was workforce. We figured out that the company had 62 full-time employees, but the perception was that the company can operate at the exact same level of production. So like not lose any single pound of milk with only 50 employees. So 12 employees were excessive or redundant, whatever you call it. And so there were two ways to go about. The first one is just to let them go overnight, and next day we operate with 50. But obviously that's gonna create a lot of tension with both the executive team, because I only recently joined an organization at that point in time, and with employees themselves, right? So managing by fear and managing by pressure is typically not the most efficient way to measure. So what we decided to do is we decided to just let the natural attrition go and always have a backstop. So the agreement was, now we have 62 employees, and that was an industry with very high attrition. So in a couple of weeks, one of them will leave. We'll try to see if we can operate with 61. And then in another week, like one more will leave. And we'll see if we can operate with 60. And then somebody else will leave. And we're going to go to 59. If at any point of time, we come to the realization that we've got too low and we can no longer operate at the necessary production level, we're going to come back to this room, we're going to meet, we're going to have kind of open discussion. But before we do that, we're just going to let people leave and we're not going to rehire them. And lo and behold, 3 months later, 48 employees, same level of production. And so there was kind of two ways to the shock way to just let people go, or let it kind of gradually go. And in 3 months, not only it was 48 employees and kind of more profitable, but people got confidence that they can, like extend their horizons and do more with less resources.
That's amazing. That's a good story. Love that. And it kind of speaks to something that I've been observing in my own career for a couple of years, and I have never put into words before, but kind of using well, I guess I have on this podcast before, kind of using a bottom-up approach of looking at evidence from a fundamental level. So at a level of, where the work is being done. And so you're almost using sort of like top line analysis, because you're saying we're going to monitor our production, but then also at a bottom line, we're going to watch the number of employees, and we're going to see if we can kind of use both types of analysis and see if we're going to be okay. You kind of learn from it as you go. And also there's probably some organizational adjustment. I think I said that badly, but it's the best I can do right now. It's not a fully formed thought yet. But I think the learning slow process and the learning by looking at fundamental elements and looking at raw data and experience is kind of what you're talking about there.
Yep. And
pretty cool.
Obviously, the approach taken. So the management should always be flexible. It depends on what kind of environment you are. And with cows, you have to understand that as opposed to as opposed to kind of like a manufacturing environment. So in the manufacturing environment, let's say if you are in an oversupply situation, if you produce too much, you can just like shut down the machine, right? Shut down the machine, close the doors of the particular department, reallocate people, and that's it. Once things improve, you just open the doors, you turn the electricity on, you start the machine again, or even you can buy like a new machine or whatever. So it's a very rapidly expanding, contracting environment. It's very easy where you scale up and scale down. With cows, you just cannot do that, right? So you just cannot like plug the switch on the cows and say, oh, you know what, I overproduced 25%, so I'm going to put this 25% of my cows on hold. So cows, you always have to feed them. And vice versa. So if tomorrow all of a sudden I need 25% more milk, like there is no 25% more cows that you can just ship on the truck and put in the next barn. So you more or less have the same number of cows in midterm. So you can increase your production capacity kind of over a year or a couple of years, but definitely not in a month or two. So now you operate in the situation where like, well, okay, I have these cows. I will have those cows no matter what, but I can't sell the milk or I can't sell the milk. So the only thing that's variable is really like your efficiencies of producing this milk. Like how many people you have, how things flow, kind of how you control your costs. But in the production environment, I absolutely agree with you. you just have to take raw data and then find what variables you have and how you can change those variables to achieve whatever goals you're trying to achieve, and experiment.
So I have kind of my last final thought question is, what if, so somebody like myself, who's a small business owner, running a nonprofit that's small, so I am not only leading, but I'm also in the middle. And so sometimes it's difficult for me because what I'm doing feels like it's a necessity, feels like it has to be done this way, because again, I'm in the middle of it, but I'm also leading this way. Whereas sometimes it's so helpful to have fresh eyes look and to ask these questions. How is it that somebody like myself, who's in the middle, because I would literally be asking myself a lot of these questions. So do you have tips or thoughts of how somebody who's in a smaller business, who still wants to use these same principles that I'm assuming translate across size of company? It's obviously been proven it translates across industries. So how would somebody in a smaller company operate in a similar capacity?
So if you have at least one employee, you can always have this employee do go see and assess, but you have to have like a really open conversation, is that this employee has an absolute kind of openness to express whatever ideas he or she sees fit. And the worst repercussion would be that you would just say, ignore it. Like, have heard you, we're not gonna do this, right? So if somebody knows that they can, first of all, they have to be given this time to observe. So you cannot just kind of come and say, oh, okay, let's have a 15-minute kind of mowing session. So go see and assess doesn't work over 15 minutes. It requires at least kind of 8 hours in my opinion. So take an employee, if you have one, and give this kind of employee a mandate to observe your organization within 8 hours and come up with any kind of ideas of observation, no matter how radical they are. Well, kind of with the rules of the game that you are not required to take those observations, but whatever the observations are, the employee will not suffer any negative consequences from just speaking them out. And I mean, if you have, as everybody else, have a bias toward kind of the current situation and your thought process, then I'm sure people around you can help you resolve this bias. Does it make sense?
Awesome. So I think so first of all, thank you for sharing the wisdom. This has been really awesome and eye-opening. I think it's really applicable. I think observation is one thing I take out of this. It's like really spending time in the details and really observing. And when you are asking about a process that you're seeing, ask why, whatever the process is. And what's great is I think that anybody can do what you just said. That's a super practical thing to do. So I like that a lot. I did actually, and I know you mentioned it with physical goods, but I actually did this for a 2-day period for about 3 or 4 hours per person on a sales team. And I sat with them. I sat next to them for 3 or 4 hours, 2 days back to back for 2 different sales reps. And I found some really interesting things as well to help improve the business from a sales process perspective. So I do think it's what the stuff you're saying is, that's the only time I remember doing that. But it wasn't, those were not physical goods and it still worked. So great advice. So just like Beastmode was saying, I mean, it's cross industry, and you were saying it's cross size, and then even in my case, it was a small example, but still worked really well.
Right, and if somebody wants to deep dive that, it's actually just the top of the iceberg, and the iceberg is the formalized process that has been developed by Toyota, and I believe it's been widely published. It's called A3. So if anybody wants to get kind of a greater perspective and more depth and width to how to do that efficiently, definitely Google Toyota A3, and you will get plenty of advice on,
That's great.
On how to go about it. I just sort of explained my own practical experience with that.
Love that.
But that
thank you
wisdom
so
and
much.
insight, I believe, is meant to be shared just as well. Just like when Solomon received all of his wisdom, the very